I think that book was such a phenomenal seller because people wanted to know in their 30s what they could predictably expect of their 40s. And people didn't realize that it was predictable. They thought it was a crapshoot. That you lived life and who knew what would happen. It's all random. And Gail Sheehy said no, based on all this research by Daniel Levinson and some other people, which you can into print. We can know some things about stages of human development. We can generalize about what your 50s are going to be and how they might be different from your 30s. Well, if that's true, this company better start generalizing because we're about to become a company of people in their 40s and 50s instead of a company of people in their 20s and 30s. And if nothing else, people in their 40s and 50s have different health problems than people in their 20s and 30s. And so our health care plans and benefits have to start taking that into account before we're caught by surprise. Those are knowable. They are all predictable. They are known now. Right? That's what I believe the discipline of personnel needs to do, is to pay attention to that knowledge, that knowability about people. So those are some of the things that I've been talking about. I will stop for a minute. I can go further about any of the areas that have already come up, or would be happy to talk about any areas that have not in fact come up. Okay, for any of you who would like to do that. And I'd like to do that for a while we're together, and then have another break, after which some of you may want to leave and some of you may want to come back and stay longer. Is that all right with you? Yeah. Because otherwise I'll just go on without any signals from you as to where any of this is finding a home in your thinking. So let me ask you if there's anything of any of these things we've been talking about that strike you. Yes, please.
You had said earlier that you were going to talk about the debt culture.
Yes.
Did you touch on that and I missed it? Or?
I missed that? Is there a specific part of that? Because that's a pretty broad term. Do you want to help guide me on something you might be interested in about that, or an observation that you have about debt culture?
Well, you've talked about the different people who are going to be in the workforce and how digital is changing. And I'm assuming that because of the influx of different cultures of people that we're now hiring, that the culture in terms of how we're going to be working in the future are going to change, as well as, like you said, health care and worrying about, your parents because they're aging. How is this going to affect the culture as it exists today, which I don't quite know what that is in terms of what it will be like in the year 2000.
Okay, that helps me. Thank you. Let me come back at you with a couple of the assumptions that you made. You said you were assuming that digital's workforce would be changing and things like that. Well, in fact, digital's workforce is not changing as much as you might think. I'll find these slides eventually, but when I talk about digital being part of the world, I'm afraid that in many cases you couldn't tell it from looking at digital. Okay? That is to say, as I said before, how many times do you go into a room and there's fewer than 15% white males? In fact, digital is becoming what I call more and more a community of sameness, while the world is becoming more and more a community of difference. That's quite remarkable. I don't know how we're managing to do that. Well, I actually do. But we are. We're managing to do that. That is to say, because of a number of things, which have to do with having largely suburban offices, with the fact that most of the people who will be with us in the future are with us now, if you accept any of that baby boom stuff, except for this increasing number of people who are going to be retiring. It's remarkable to me how many employment people, are there a lot of employment people here who I'm about to offend? If they're all in the front, all right, well, you'll get to me first. Yeah. It's remarkable to me how many employment recruiting people there are who do not know how to find people different from the ones that are already in the company. Different in many ways. Now, don't jump to too many conclusions when I say different. For instance, I started this group a year ago in personnel, and I wanted to hire some people into the group other than myself. And the employment recruiter said, well, sure, we do that all the time. I'm here to help you. I said, good. I want some people with a background in applied behavioral sciences. He said, what's that? So I explained that. He says, we don't have people like that in personnel. I said, oh, what do we have? Well, it turned out that he thought that I was in the personnel systems group, which meant IS, which meant D family, and he said, I can get you some programmer analysts. I said, excuse me, that's not what I want. I said, applied behavioral sciences are people who know things about people. He says, we don't have people like that in personnel. He finally gave up and told me to find them myself, so I did. He said he couldn't help me. Now, I know a number of people. Now, I also know a lot of employment recruiters of whom this is probably not true. And especially those of you who are contractors. Don't hold this against me. How many of you are contractors in this room? Oh, my goodness. All right. But it's the old question that I've brought up before, which is, if you just go back to where you thought everybody was before, you're going to be missing things. First of all, there aren't those people there where we came from. There's different kinds of people, right? And we don't know a lot about those other kinds of people. So if your image of the future is business as usual or more of the same, and you go back to the same old places, that is the top 100 colleges or the top 50 places where we know people from digital used to come from, you're not going to do it. You're not going to find different people in different kinds of work styles and work orientations for the kind of work that we have now facing us. So people have to understand that the work has changed, therefore the recruiting specs have changed in ways that our job descriptions do not now reflect. Do they? The job descriptions now accurate for the kind of work we're going to need 5 years from now. Okay. My other point, obviously, is this one about the open recs are to fill currently identified business performance needs. Right? Now the problem with that is that if you think about it, I have a slide here, but I'll tell you what it says. It says the U.S. payroll is $50 million a week. Digital. Digital's U.S. payroll is $50 million a week. Who is the steward, the trustee of that payroll being spent wisely and well? I think a case could be made that personnel should be. Therefore, I think part of the work of personnel is the stewardship of $50 million a week and how it's spent in terms of what I would call the return on productivity. And that's a whole new role. People in personnel, they don't like thinking of having any responsibility for money. But, well, much less for performance. But some people have suggested, not facetiously, that employment recruiters should be rewarded on the basis of how well the people that they hire do 3 years after they are hired. Put that in your metrics and smoke. Right? You understand what I mean, though, figuratively by that, which is, right now, it is what, I'm sorry to use this term, but it's what the employment recruiting community in this company uses. They call it a body count. It's not even a head count. They also call it delivering the bodies. They get rewarded on how many open recs they fill in terms of filling that head count number for the bodies. And we all know that there are certain kinds of people that we fill here. If you're in F&A or accounting, you're what is called a bean counter. I say hi, I'm the president. I say, who are you? He says, hi, I'm from finance, I'm a bean counter. Right? The people in personnel, what are they called? They're called paper pushers. So the paper pushers meet the bean counters. Very strange. Right? Has nothing to do with people, human resource management, all these higher order things. The paper pushers and the bean counters are hard at work, while the number crunchers are at the terminal. Very strange. If you try to describe this to somebody from Mars, it would be like a comedy routine. Okay? So my concern is, wait a minute, who is thinking about how much an employee is going to contribute to the company 2 jobs from now? Because we know that people only stay in their jobs 15 months to 18 months. So that's not really asking for a lot of thinking, just a little thinking, right? And how many of you talk to people once a month about the contributions of employees 2 jobs from now. All of you. You haven't turned around and looked. Do you know how many hands there are? Not one. He refuses to turn around, so I have to tell him anything happens behind me. Isn't that interesting? All right. Now, that's a little nutty. It's a little nutty. However, it's not inconsistent with our culture because, you know, the schools of this country very often pride themselves on how many of their graduates get a job after graduation. Have you ever heard that as a statistic? A lot of schools market themselves on the basis of saying, you know, 96% of our graduating class of last year had a job within 6 months of graduation. You know that kind of way of thinking, right? Well, that also is a very dangerous way of thinking because, as we know, people don't stay in the same job for their whole lifetime, right? As a matter of fact, the figures Richard Bowles, who runs What Color Is Your Parachute, and other people say that people now not only have many jobs, but they have several careers in their lifetime. And so schools are being now asked to prepare people not just for the single job after graduation, but for what is sometimes called learning how to learn. So it's not just us. I don't want to just point the finger and say, oh, we're unique. We're not at all. We're part of the culture that we live in, and that culture has basically not looked very far ahead. I've got another slide here somewhere. I can't look for my slide anymore. But it says, as I think about Japan, you know, we use Japan as a model a lot. And the model that we use for Japan, I think, is often kind of misleading, mistaken. The way I think about Japan, the difference between Japan and the U.S., so far as I understand it, from looking at it for 15 years, is that Japan as a culture, as a civilization, takes a long view of things, and the U.S. typically has been in it for the quick buck. Everything else that I know about the difference between Japan and the U.S. follows from this statement, folks. I mean, I'm just me, but I've been looking at it for years. Everything else, to me, is a subset of that. Okay? Now, I read a while ago that Mr. Matsushita, you know Matsushita? Panasonic is a division of Matsushita. A lot of companies are divisions of Matsushita. Mr. Matsushita, when he founded his company, had a 100-year plan for the company. He wrote it down. They're within 6 months. Can't write. Okay? So there's been an enormous infatuation, which is very, very quickly coming to an end, by the way, in this country, with the Japanese way of doing things. Japanese management, Japanese everything. I think that's also pretty well over. And there's been a lot of stuff written and said and done about that. And it seems to me it all boils down to this. As a culture, as a civilization, in the largest sense, Japan goes back a long, long way. The U.S. goes back, we just had a 200th anniversary. Okay? So there are some things that are working here that I think we need to understand in terms of the larger picture. And that boils down for me, in terms of the culture, as I was saying, I think it's a post-European U.S. It's what I call a post-employment U.S. That's sort of interesting, but I think I've said something about it already. Fewer and fewer young people are going to work for large companies in the United States. Right? They see that this story about working their way up the company is sort of a myth. This is the typical work environment in the United States, in any big company, right? The idea is that you work your way up from what I call the mailroom. Everybody in the U.S. starts in the mailroom. I don't know what it is, but it's something about our mythology. The folklore of the U.S. is that everybody started out as a mailroom clerk and one day becomes the president. You've heard this story, right? And you work your way by crawling, backstabbing, biting, kicking over the backs of the people you work with, because not everybody from there can fit to there. Right? But this is also part of our culture. You know these stories about the president of the college who gets everybody together the first day and says, look to your right, look to your left, only one of you will graduate? You know that. Same story. Right? It's the mentality of scarcity. Right? And it says, all right, there's this class system, and there's going to be a lot of people on the bottom, and only a few pieces of cream will rise to the top. Right? And then we persuade ourselves it's a meritocracy. But then we've recently said, you know what, there's a whole bunch of middle managers who aren't doing anything, so let's get rid of them. IBM got rid of 17,000 last year. Right? IBM got rid of 17,000 in the US last year. So there's a chunk that's been taken out of the American dream pyramid here. And then there's another piece that's taken out. These little pieces down here get chopped off. Why is that? Because at the bottom, what's called low skill things can be done better by machines. Anything that is mindless and repetitive and boring can be done better by a computer, because that's what computers are good at. So you automate those jobs out of existence and get rid of those people at the bottom. So then the company looks like that, some kind of funny looking arrow. And then, I was saying earlier, the big change recently in the U.S. workforce has been the increase in part-time and temporary workers in the workforce, who are not just the temp, which means my secretary is going to be sick on Wednesday, can you get me a temporary typist? But these are temporary contractors up into some very high levels in the organization, as you all probably know, which means in terms of project consultants, software engineering. In hospitals, these are the people who are the emergency room physicians. They are not the employees of the hospital. They are contractors of a temporary service firm that supplies ER physicians to hospitals. Right? So that's going higher and higher up. And so who you're left with as your regular permanent workforce is those little dots there instead of all those dots there. What has happened to all of those other people? They've taken jobs in what's called the service sector for 1/3 of what they were making, 1/5 of what they were making before in the American economy. Right? Now, that's the picture of a lot of work in large companies in the U.S. That's why it is said by the U.S. Department of Labor that the Fortune 1000 companies have not added a single job to the American economy in the past 15 years. All of the growth of jobs in the American economy have been in small and medium-sized firms and in self-employment. The fastest growing sector of people working in the United States are people who work at home. Right? And who knows about that? Well, a company called Sharp, which despite its name is Japanese. You know that Sharp is Japanese, yes? Sharp obviously is onto this because they have a whole division that is focused on the age of the home office, of whom they say 23 million Americans are working out of their homes, and the number is growing every year, and we have really got a market niche for you. My problem is people at digital don't seem to realize that the way in which people work has changed. This is the culture. Ask a silly question, you get this kind of answer. The culture at digital says that you get up in the morning, you drive your car, preferably a Japanese car, to a digital parking lot. Spend a long time looking for a place to park. Right? Go into it, right. Get your exercise by walking from wherever it is you park into the office building that is a digital building. Go and find your personal office, and you know it's yours because your name is on there, and nobody else ever goes in there because it's yours. It's a private office space. And you sit down at a desk, and because we have a desktop computing strategy, you sit down and do your work on your desktop. For some reason, digital thinks this is the shape of work in the future, because we happen to be building dozens of buildings. You know about the facilities? Okay? The plans are to keep building all of these buildings in and around where you now are. And the problem is that, of course, that has backfired in some of the communities around here, as you probably know because you live there. And there was an article that I was going to show you. Trust me, there's an article somewhere that appeared in something called the Acton Banner or Beacon, or something like that. Beacon. Which says, Town Council rebels at Digital's plans to build new buildings. there's a backlash, I believe, in the communities around Boston, saying, wait a minute, all of this wonderful high-tech growth sounded great for a while, but now there are traffic jams in our communities, right? And it's not the nice bucolic place we moved to 15 years ago when we bought it from the farmers who were kicked off the land to make room for the computers. So somebody at Digital, and my concern is that it's too many people in personnel are not speaking up, are assuming that the way in which we work in the future is going to be a continuation of the way in which we've worked in the past, which means the same time in the same place, right? 8 to 5 is the time, except we've now expanded it so that we're now running 24-hour operations in a lot of places. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, right? In a lot of plants. But the model is still the same. You drive to work, you go into a digital office building, which Digital has built. You go into your office and you do your work. Well, it turns out that digital employees in Europe are thinking about work very differently. And they're saying, whatever happened to the electronic cottage? You know, I could bring a terminal home with me. I don't have to go into work. What about single parents who have such a struggle over finding daycare, childcare, and who, if they could do their work from home, would be able to do two things at once? Now, that's crazy enough by itself, but if you want to do that, understand how it's kind of a double-edged sword. But it's saying, wait a minute, you don't have to choose between giving up your job and taking care of your kids. There's no reason why you have to go to work to do your work. Now, I happen to think that over 1/4 of the employees of Digital do not have to go to work to do their work. But that's growing. Okay? Now, I'm not saying, don't misinterpret me, that I'm saying that everybody has to stay home and work out of their pantry, which they hate. They're meaning to get around painting it for years. Well, I can't stand the place, and I'm saying, no, you're going to be forced to stay there. No, I'm saying you simply have some more alternatives than we thought about before. Isn't it possible, given our technology, that some days, when the car doesn't start, when you, et cetera, you could do your work from your terminal at home because the output is the same. And in fact, it is. If you start looking at what the work is, remember I said, that you really need to start looking at the work. What the work is increasingly what's called knowledge work, done by what are called knowledge workers. Now, those people don't have to be anywhere to do what they do. Literally, they could be in India, and they are. See, it's no longer a joke to say, you could be in India. The point is that code that was written came from India. Right? So, it's space-free and time-free. Most people's work has become space-free and time-free precisely because of what information technology is all about. That is what this company sells to other companies in order to reorganize the shape of their company, in order to change their work schedules, in order to experiment with different kinds of work environments and workforces, that is to say, to use as employees people who were not available before if they had to fit a specific time and place in which they work, which are primarily, in this country, women and single parents. Understand how these things link together. That's why it's terribly important to start seeing the whole picture, because if you're just focusing on one thing, for instance, part-time employment. If we increase part-time employment, what would it do for us? Well, it would do several things, I think. I haven't been part of any conversation about this yet, but part-time employment, which we don't do very well, because, for example, I know a woman who works 4 days a week and she's not allowed to get any training, to go to any training. She's only 4 days a week, not 5 days a week. Right? Now, there's something wrong with that if you're looking at productivity and work output. So who's responsible for identifying that, seeing it as a problem, coming up with some alternative scenarios and contingency plans? I believe people in personnel. I believe that is the work of personnel. Otherwise, what we are, as an alternative, is paper pushers. And let me tell you what happens to paper pushers. They can be replaced by a machine. That's the career counseling part of this. Yes.
In the scenarios that you have painted, terms of personnel's involvement, whether it's in employment or more in the generalist role, I'm not clear as to what you believe the line manager's involvement is, if any, and how much that influences not only what happens today, but perhaps DEC's future.
Say a little more about that. Don't just leave me out there with a leading question. I mean,
For
give
example,
me some choices.
you're referring to the ability to have part-time workers. Digital has recently, personnel has recently changed the policy from full-time employees to regular, and one can stipulate, and yes, there are prorated benefits. But if we use secretarial positions, for example, there are many secretaries inside of the company right now that would like to work 20 hours a week or less. So the possibility exists to take 2 candidates to fill 1 position.
Mm-hmm.
But the decision, the way that I understand it, would be made by the actual business group in terms of whether they will count those 2 people as 1 head count or 2.
Now, the highest level mathematical thinking in this company that I know of is whether or not 2 people is 1 head count. I mean, it's amazing for a group of engineers, but you're absolutely right.
So my sharing is from the personnel perspective. I understand, or I believe that part of our overall success would be to influence, to assist, to guide, etc. But I believe that the line managers also have a role in DEC's present and future, and I'd like for you to speak more to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it goes a little beyond that. You know, I heard somebody give a presentation about his company last week, and he said, our company is known as a fun place to work. Is digital known as a fun place to work? I don't know. Is it? Yeah. How many people think digital is a fun place to work? How many people think it's only sometimes fun? Sometimes it's a pain.
It's kind of like religion, you're not supposed to.
That's because we're New England Puritan company. One of the things that I see happening is that we've got a lot of people who are new to the company hiring other people who are new to the company. So one of the ways that I would come back and just try to be provocative with you is what would happen if we said, now we don't do this in digital, we don't make rules like this. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not speaking for anyone. Have I made enough disclaimers? What would happen if we said that nobody who was hired from outside the company could hire anybody else from outside the company until they've been here for a year? Because you see, one of the things that's happening is that a lot of people from Honeywell are hiring other people from Honeywell after they've been in digital for 2 months. One of the reasons for that is that they know the network at Honeywell and the system there much better than they know the network at digital. They haven't bothered to learn it, and it's too complicated for most people to learn. It's a very complicated culture. All right? And so it's easier for a new hire from outside the company to hire other new hires from outside the company. No wonder over half of the company has been here less than 4 years and hasn't any grounding in the history and experience of the company. How many of you could come up here now and give a talk to the rest of us about what the open door means? Raise your hand. Open door. How many of you can come up here right now? Don't be shy, please. How many of you would feel comfortable coming up here right now and talking to the rest of us about what it means to do the right thing? Okay. Those two phrases are embedded in the history and tradition of digital's culture. They are key to the core values of digital's culture. You see what I mean? It makes me a little squirmy. Okay, so yes, line managers have to start understanding some of those issues, but I think, you see, I keep coming back to saying I'm trying to make a case for the fact that I think people in personnel are the ones who should have some expertise about people. And line managers should have some expertise about things like project management and opening a DPN and getting the product shipped. I think that's what they're hired to do at some level. Those kinds of things. And I think the human dimension, the social, the organizational dimension, are things that line managers look to other people for expertise about. And I think some of those other people should be people in personnel. Do you disagree with me?
Yes.
Yes.
You disagree? Tell me. Yeah. So you're saying, in other words, are you of the community that believes that line managers should become human resource managers?
I don't believe that they should become human resource managers, but I believe that no line manager is going to be effective if they don't understand and relate to the people that work for or with them.
Right. And do most of them come by that ability naturally? Are they good at that?
I think from what I've seen, it would depend on their experiences
Yeah.
and how open they were to it.
Yeah, but how do we ensure that more line managers are more capable of doing this?
It requires a certain amount of training, but I think that what the core issue is that we all believe that line managers ought to be human resource partners.
Sure.
And if they need the training to do that, then we ought to have the expertise to provide the training.
Can you hear what I'm saying? See, the other thing is, you understand the line managers are saying that they believe the personnel people should be business partners.
I believe that too.
Yeah, I know. We're all trying to be partners.
This is a difference between being a business partner and walking in with a mop and a bucket and cleaning up a mess that a manager has made because he or she is a technical person, and every time there's a people problem, they turn to the personnel person and say, come in and help me with my conflict that I'm having with my people.
There's out of hand.
Yeah, with the question that was brought up, I've been in digital 12 years, and I've had 2 part-time professional positions as an IS person. Each time my employment person said, sorry, I can't help you find a part-time position because all the recs I have are full-time. And I didn't get that support. I had to get the line manager, but the line manager's was, it's a head count, that's finance stuff, it's head count, you'll be counted as one full person. And so I did find positions of my own, but the line manager has the cost center, going back to what you said, they have the last say. And they're the ones that decide on hiring or not. And it was that person, right or wrong, it was that person who made that decision whether they wanted to go to do that part-time position or not do that part-time position.
Yeah.
But they were saying, but we'll have to count you as a whole head.
Sure.
So the whole process behind it was against their doing it.
No, in fact, they don't. And I've been talking to people in corporate finance just to make very sure that we're all saying the same thing. And the manager of corporate finance planning and analysis has said that there is nothing in finance which should keep the line manager from hiring 2 people, job sharing, part-time,
But that's what the
etc.
line managers
I know that. I know that. You see, so we do spread those stories as reasons of passing the buck and pointing and saying, well, but I can't because then it will, so on. My concern is, isn't it, I mean, we're all in this together, isn't it true, folks, that we keep putting obstacles in our own way when we know that there is a more flexible, more open way of doing things, and maybe we should identify the things that we are creating as barriers to ourselves and change those a little, so that we don't keep using the same excuses, the same rationales to box ourselves in. That's really my whole point, is I think we're boxing ourselves in according to sort of obsolete models, things that we have created ourselves, which we are capable of changing, obstacles that we are capable of removing. There's nobody imposing these on us. Head count is not some law of the United States.
Some issues around managerial numbers that impact our employees. And there are decisions about how people are counted in the framework of personnel's responsibility to count. And it includes one body providing count. Whether finance chooses to acknowledge or take responsibility for that, there are certainly several indicators that the group that is studying this headcount issue cannot bring the corporation to a consensus on what is a headcount and what we want to support. Some sense of that is that that's person who comes in as a part-time, and then is moved into a full-time, and then all of a sudden we have more and more people. It's just another artificial process by which we keep the controls, checks and balances in the system, just like it is how long it takes Rex to get through the system, to get signed, and all the other processes that.
We tell ourselves that, but if we look at it more closely, that's not in fact the effect. That doesn't in fact happen for us. So we need to look at what really is going on there. And I would hate this whole afternoon to deteriorate into an argument over part-time heads. Part-time head. I understand that there are issues. Please understand that the issues are, when you look internationally, are even more interesting. That is to say, you understand I said I'm the corporate headcount reporting manager for corporate personnel. Right? You should see what happens when when area personnel in Geneva gets a message from field U.S. saying we want you to change the way in which you're reporting heads. They don't understand. See, there's another piece here we don't understand. We say there are three areas in the company. We say U.S., GIA, and Europe are the three geographies, right? But if you look at it from my point of view, from the way I've been trying to suggest we look at it today, the U.S. is one country. Right? GIA, you understand, they don't know, but they think there's somewhere between 50 and 80 countries that they operate in. And Europe, there are 16 countries in Europe, but Europe is also responsible for North Africa and the Middle East, so they've got 16 to 30 countries. The people in the U.S., who tend to be the ones who send out these memos and formulate these policies, have it easy. They've got one country they're dealing with. Some state differences, but not that many. And they think that these people are going to be able to change the way they report headcount and define part-time. They can't even communicate in 16 countries over the weekend, because half of them are on different vacation schedules from the other half. That's part of what I mean by this sort of provincial mentality, that we're going to have to understand that I think the key to looking at some of these human resource issues is to pull out of looking at Massachusetts when we look at the United States, and to pull out the United States when we look at the rest of the world in order to get a real view of what's happening in the company. That's where the future is.
As a matter of commonality, do we pay by the hour in all the countries in which we operate?
Some people get paid, as opposed to annual salaries? You mean hourly
No,
work?
I mean their annual salaries, but even if you're exempt, you still are paid. You still have an hourly assessment of what your wage is.
Oh, yeah, you can
Okay, what I'm saying,
divide it so that it works out to an hour.
what I'm
amount.
getting at is the digital pays for hours. It doesn't pay for people. It pays for work.
Well, you see, that's my other concern. We say we pay for performance. I say we pay for attendance. Okay, now, but that was my other issue about work environments. You see, it's just like in school, where if you sit in that classroom long enough, you're bound to get a diploma, right? And I contend that if you come to your office every day, there's a little blue piece of paper waiting for you on Thursday. Nobody asks you what you do for us this week. They say, oh, you put in your time, here's a check. So it's what I call paying for attendance instead of paying for performance. Here's where the hook in that is. The more people work at home, the more there is remote work, okay, which is salespeople, truck drivers, and people who work at home, basically. The more there is remote monitoring of work, the more specific the criteria are going to be as to determine what the work produced by those people is when they're not near you. Right? And what's going to be the irony, it's already happened, is that the people who are working at home and in these non-traditional ways are going to have very specific sort of standards and criteria of work output and work outcomes that their work will be judged by. Well, everybody else who goes to work, that is to go to the conventional office, will be paid for attendance. That's the real kicker, I think, waiting in the 90s for personnel administration. Okay? Which is there's going to be these totally different sorts of standards for the people who work at home and the people who work on the road and so on, to show what it is they did and to get paid for that performance. Whereas the other people who just put in their time will be paid no questions asked.
Isn't that to a degree the way that the measurement goes with exempt versus non-exempt?
Yeah, but
In a general category?
Correct. So there are these, I mean, the questions, the question is, who is going to raise these questions of these disparate standards? These very different accounting systems. And what are we going to do about it? We have this large group of people called non-exempt. Right? Wage class 2, we call it. And you know as well as I the difficulty of people in wage class 2 who want to be wage class 4. I get phone calls from a woman who says she has 2 master's degrees, she's been a secretary for 6 years. Is there ever any hope of her working in wage class 4 in this company? Lots of stories about that. Wage class 2. So I'm saying that these are the issues that really have to be, I think, identified, analyzed, some new thinking brought to bear on them, rather than our just being so busy processing the pieces that I was talking about earlier, that we don't step back enough to see what those are, because otherwise they're going to catch us by surprise in some very unpleasant ways. I'm not sure I answered your question about line managers' responsibility. Clearly, line managers have responsibility. But people in personnel have to earn their credibility to be seen as business partners, or digital we say, have a seat at the table, in order to have that conversation with the line manager in the first place. Right, right. So you can fill your plate, she says, right? If you don't sit at the table, you can't fill up your plate, and therefore you can't say, my plate's too full. Right? So as long as the personnel people are in another room and are not present for the conversation, there's no partnership going on in the first place. And my whole pitch here is that I believe that personnel people will earn their way, will earn an invitation to the table, the more they are seen as having a handle on some of these issues, and the more they make sense to the line managers, the more they say things that the line managers identify as things that really ought to be paid attention to from a business perspective. Because otherwise people in personnel are sort of invisible, take it for granted, and assumed to be doing all of that stuff that personnel people are doing, which is not taking part in the crucial business decisions that are being made. So that's my concern about the relationship with the line. Because first we've sort of got to get their attention. And you know the old story about how you get the attention of the mule. You hit it upside the head with a 2x4. And the 2x4 in this case, I believe, is information and ideas that are so provocative that they can't be ignored by the line manager, because they are crucial to the business success of the line manager's activity. And I think, as I'm trying to demonstrate, that we can make that case to get their attention very quickly. I've been meeting with line groups for months now. It's real clear to them what these issues are. It was the line managers group that identified the college students from Japan studying in the United States. Oh yeah.
You know why that is? You know partially why that is. Because the Japanese college system is inferior to ours. While the high school is superior.
Why somebody studying here?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
You mentioned before about the aging of the workforce.
Yeah.
And that maybe one blip going through. I'm not sure I would have said this 20 years ago. One of the models I have is that as people get older, they get more efficient and productive. They accomplish the same thing with fewer actions sometimes. Is there any sign of that in the workforce? I mean, we make better use of the tools we have, maybe, I don't know what the skills we have.
We're just not as flashy.
We do it more efficiently.
He's making a case for older people being valued. I don't know. I mean, what do other people? I'm not sure what your point is.
Are there any indications?
Trying to make everybody feel good?
No, measurements of productivity that have shown that, as this group has matured, they have become more productive. Granted, the tools have become greater.
No, there's an issue about the learning curve here. There's an issue about new learning, which is that the argument goes back to saying things are changing so fast. There's so many new things happening that it's that you quickly become obsolete, out of date in your schooling. Right? Now, with engineering, that is quite dramatic. Where's this? There it is. With engineering, you know, the argument is that a graduate from MIT in engineering who is 23 graduates from engineering and gets a job at digital and is productive and terrific for how long?
3 years.
I hear 5 to 7. Do I hear any more? 5 to 7 years, at which point they're washed up. And they're starting to go on the down, right? So they're 28 to 30 years old. All right?
When we make managers.
Then we make the managers. Then we make the managers, right? That's what he says, right? Where they become your business partners for you to deal with for the rest of your natural life. All right? So the point is that this isn't quite done right. They reach their peak after 5 to 7 years after MIT. Well, guess what? 5 to 7 years after MIT, they're not in MIT anymore. MIT doesn't care. They are now the responsibility of the employer. That is to say, their continued productivity is the responsibility of the employer. And this is what's happening in terms of the aging issue, is that we then say, wait a minute, we can't afford to have them become more and more obsolete, out of touch with their productivity.
You're showing the decline, and that decline is simply in terms of their contribution, direct contribution to technology advancement, which as they go on, becomes less and less of the total contribution to the operation.
Well, there's some...
Because they're picking up other skills. I mean, they're picking up project management skills, they're picking up a lot of other...
Not automatic.
They don't come out of MIT.
These things do not happen automatically. There have been a number of comments today in which people say, well, this will happen, people will see this will change. Who do you think is going to change it outside of this room? I have not seen the evidence that there is a group of people in the company who are on top of all the issues we're discussing and are going to make it all right for all of us. And it's not automatic that an engineer is going to broaden the portfolio of abilities that the engineer has beyond the technical ones. It doesn't happen automatically. It only happens through some kind of intervention or program which says, wait a minute, we've got to broaden you, we've got to turn you from being a technical contributor to being some kind of general manager and give you some kind of people skills, because traditionally engineers are not really strong in social skills, put it mildly, right? Engineers have love affairs with terminals. Now, okay, so you have to understand that.
You're saying you're graphing the technology contribution. That's
No,
what
I'm graphing the MIT contribution. I'm graphing the half-life, the shelf life of an MIT engineering education, right? And I'm saying that after you, well, no, excuse me.
To me, maybe not.
Yeah, but look at what MIT did in their engineering curriculum last year. MIT revolutionized their engineering curriculum last year to include humanities and social sciences.
But then are you saying in that downward curve, they lose that portion of it, or just the technical portion?
I don't know. But I'm saying I can't be the one with all the answers. I'm saying where are the people who are asking and formulating the answers to these questions in this company on which the success of the company depends? There ought to be dozens of us having these conversations. I mean, I can say provocative things, but the point is, who in your group in personnel is dealing with this question? You are. Anybody else? Speak to that. What's your name?
Peggy Carney, we're dealing with it in training.
Right. Talk to Peggy Carney. She's dealing with it. Okay. You understand my point, though, is that we can't keep assuming that somebody else is either taking care of it and don't do something to find out who that is or grow it in our own group. I see too much of that happening around the company, saying, well, you know, I have a lot of faith that somebody, usually in headquarters, usually in the greater Maynard, Massachusetts area, must be thinking about this. Not necessarily. And so you're not off the hook. If you think any of these issues are interesting or important, please, my request to you is contribute to doing something about them. You know, I'm just raising a number of questions that I've thought about. And my point here was simply to illustrate in one job category what the problem is if things aren't attended to. Because we, in engineering, do massive interventions here This is what the National Technological University is all about. It's what the JEEP program is all about. It's what Association for ASEE, American Society for Engineering Education does. We invest enormously in the continued education of these engineers so that they don't become technically obsolete, but in fact continue to produce technically in this country. Right? We do the same thing in manufacturing. We have a lot of investment through these Skills Council and other efforts in manufacturing, right? Through job resource centers in Marlborough, as you know, in which we recognize that unattended to, people are going to sort of lose momentum. Right? And so things have to be done here and here and here. Let me just say that in terms of the workforce, something that Betsy and I had talked about, it's the same, my point is the same in terms of who we hire. And before we hired them, they were in school somewhere. Right? And right now, the situation in schools is not real great in terms of scientific education in the United States. For instance, if anybody's interested in any student coming out of an American school with a good science education, you need to really pay some attention, because it turns out that there are very few schools which have an adequate science training program. Some people were talking about Japanese schools before. So if we want to hire people who are well educated, we're going to have to make what I call a strategic investment somewhere back in their earlier lives to make sure that what comes out are people that we want to hire, who can do the kind of work that we think there will be. This is where that other thing comes up in the future. So after you've defined what the work is going to be in 1990 and 1995, then you can say who we'll need to hire in order to do that work, and then you can say what traits those people will need to have in order for them to be hired. And then it seems to me as a company we have to say, how are we ensuring that this is occurring in the society that we live in the schools, and in all the countries in which we operate. That, I believe, is the work of personnel and of line managers. Huh? Okay, but it's a kind of human resource management that is based on human resource planning of many years out, many more years than we typically use. Are you with me on some of that? Okay, so it's very clear to many of us from many different companies that it's in our common interest that there not be 30 million illiterate adults in the United States. It's very clear that's not just Digital's concern. I was talking to people from Hewlett Packard. They're concerned about it too. Guess what? IBM is concerned about it too. It's not surprising. Why? Because we're all talking about the same population, the same society that we live in which kids are being given diplomas from schools who can't read. Right? That becomes an issue which transcends all of this, but which is also a digital issue. And it is crucial to digital's future success that digital pay attention to it and not just automatically assume that the kinds of people that we need will be there when we need them. That will not happen. Yes?
You've been talking about us as a personnel organization starting to look at the 1990s in our work planning right now. And I can see that your particular group has been formulated the past year to look at some of these issues.
Yeah.
What else are you doing in your group? How large is it, besides coming out and speaking with us? Would you give us a flavor of the kinds of interventions that you're doing, or where you're recommending some of these things to occur? Or a little bit about your group.
Yeah, sure. There are three of us. Three people who work with me, four of us. It grew out of a recognition in corporate personnel that we needed to know more about the digital workforce. And so it was basically a workforce analysis effort. And everything that I'm talking to you about comes out of doing workforce analysis of who works in digital and what they do. Who the audience for that is has changed and grown a little bit in recent months. You understand we're only 12, 14 months old. And that is that initially I was asked to give a presentation as part of last fall's annual budget planning process. You know how everybody goes through this budget planning when they get ready for their long-range plan. And as part of that, typically people take a little time, half an hour, maybe an hour, to talk about what they call environmental scanning, which is let's talk about the rest of the world for an hour, and then let's get back to work. So we take a little time and we talk about the world situation, and then because we can't see any real connection between that and our work, we get back to work. Or we think about it in terms of some fairly narrow concerns, I think, that we've been identifying with each other all day. And so I was initially asked to talk to a number of groups as part of that process this past fall, and that's really the first time that I'm talking about this. And in the course of talking, people would say, this stuff is important. This is not peripheral to our work, this is our work. Or I would do some things with the maps and the time would run out in the agenda, and the manager of the group would say, that's all right, keep going. Now that's never happened to me before, right? Usually you have an hour on the agenda and you get off in time for the next thing to happen. So what's been happening is a couple things, is that groups have been recognizing that this kind of thing is not just a hit and run, one-time effort, but there's more to it. And so it requires a little more time. Not only in the meeting, but also it's not just something that you do once a year. And so a number of groups have started task forces and ways to follow up on some of these issues to keep looking at any of these aspects that I've been talking about that apply to their situations as an ongoing piece of work. To such a degree that a number of groups have started opening recs for what they call workforce analysts, right? Or to do workforce planning, or as one person called it, her group, long-range workforce planning. And she means long-range, the way I do, 10 to 15 years. Right? Because you can plan for people for 10 to 15 years, even though you can't plan for products for 10 years. So some of those things have happened. And then the other thing that's interesting that has happened is that even though I started out talking within the personnel world to other members of the B family, this has spilled over now, and the people in personnel have now invited me to talk to people in their line organizations. And so we've now jumped that fence. So it's no longer a push from corporate personnel. There's now a pull from line managers all around who are hearing about this and saying, you know, my business is international too, and I don't know exactly what the implications of that are. Come talk to us, because my plant managers need to understand it, my line managers, etc., need to understand it. So you should know that there is increasing attention being given to the scope of the concerns that I'm talking about, partly because we don't typically take a macro view, as you know. There aren't many places that talk about things that are working across geographies, across organizations, across sites, across organizations in the company. And that's what we do. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So if that's a bait, I would appreciate any invitations from any of you who think anybody else should hear this sort of thing and should discuss it, because we can be used in many ways as a catalyst for discussion, as a way to kick off or present, as you can see, some new ways of thinking about things, as a way to consult with your group behind the scenes if there are some presentations that you're working on or some plans that you're working on in terms of changing the composition of your management committees or your workforce, succession planning, AA planning, value and differences programs, and so on, obviously all fit in to the things we've been talking about today. Good luck.
Alika. Harris, this all sounds marvelous, but I have to speak really frankly in terms of the education piece that you spoke to in the business of personnel that says that we need to address some of those issues early on to affect or to be able to have some good hires for the future. And as a black female who grew up in Boston, I guess I'm very sensitive to the education or lack of that was available to most people of color in the city.
Yes.
And I guess what I'm hearing from this is now it's a suburban problem as well. Maybe has more visibility. So my comment is, no matter how we get there, it's great to see that the corporation or corporate America in general has had to take notice. And hopefully your presentation, or perhaps the personnel people in this room, doesn't stop here. Because I'm not so sure that that message is really out there.
No, I'm not either. I don't think, I think we have our heads buried in the sand block. I mean, that's a very subtle point about, you only pay attention to it when it comes close to home. If we want to talk about home, we can talk about home. Massachusetts is our home state, right? Massachusetts is where we should have the greatest concern, the greatest stake in what's going on in the state. So we should understand what it looks like in the state that we're in the communities that we're in, whether they're suburban or urban. And as a company, we should ask ourselves whether we have any role to play whatsoever in the situation of the communities and neighbors that we live and work among. Right? This is current data from Massachusetts. Current this year. Now, that raises a whole bunch of questions about community relations, about our responsibilities to the communities, as I say, that we live in. Not just that we have plants in, because some of us live in communities that digital does not have facilities in. But whether or not we're number one or number two with Raytheon this month, in terms of how many people, we have 34,000 people, I don't know how many they have employed in Massachusetts. 34,000 people is a lot of people in the state, enough that it gives us a certain amount of visibility, and it certainly gives us some political power, as you probably know. So I think I take your point. And again, the issue is, will you help? Will all of you help with this? By thinking about it, trying to draw the connections between your personal life. I mean, again, as a group, as a community of employees of this company, we have to say, well then, where should we be taking any action? Where does it make sense for us to pay some attention to what's happening outside of the workforce of the company, in the communities in which we live and work? Because there are some very, very strong kinds of connections that people make. One man, after I talked, came up to me and said, until you talked, I didn't understand. In the supermarket where I shop, there are these 10-pound and 25-pound bags of rice in the aisles. So and I thought the stock clerks had left them in the aisles instead of taking them back into the back. He says, then I realized, in listening to you, that people are buying these and taking them home and eating them. He says, my family wouldn't go through a 10 or 25-pound bag of rice in a year. He says, and then I looked around at who lives in my community. He lives in Lawrence. All right? Lawrence is 48% white. That's what the other 52% is. Clue, they eat a lot of rice. Okay? Latin American and Asian cultures don't live and eat the way European cultures do. And this man was able to see in the aisle of his supermarket that he was living in a non-European community. An increasingly non-European community, I should say. Okay? The figures are that in 4 years, whites become a minority in Boston.
You gave a birth rate, an average birth rate in the country,
Yes.
1.7.
Yes. I said that masked a lot of difference.
Yeah, because I was about to say, one of the things that doesn't say is to white people is that 1.7 does not represent white birth rate.
No, that's right.
It's far down, it's far below that.
Everybody hear what he's saying? Hispanics are growing twice as fast as blacks in the U.S., and blacks are growing twice as fast as whites. Rate of increase in population. Okay, so that 1.7, I said when I put it up, this masks a lot of differences underneath it. This is just an averaged out 1.7 babies per woman, remember that? The birth rate in the United States. Masks the difference that Hispanics are growing 4 times faster than the general population is, 4 to 5 times faster. Which again, see, I need to spell this out because sometimes statements like this become very obscure. What that means is that the average white woman in the United States is ending her childbearing years. That's what that means. And the average Hispanic woman in the United States is at the beginning of her childbearing years.
But it does much to explain why we're going to have a population that will only be 15% white male.
Yes. You bet.
That grows exponentially.
Okay? You can't work unless you've first been born. Syssman's first law. Because people don't understand that. They get all, what's your name?
Pay them after they pay.
Tony's absolutely right. You see, people don't understand that. They think there's some magical statement here. You can't go to work until you've been born first. Believe me, if you haven't been born, you can't get employed at digital. Right? There are a whole bunch of people who are not being born. In the United States, that's white people. In the world in general, it's Americans. Well, in the world in general, the people who are not being born are European. Basically, European origins. Got that picture? That, I think, is it's both interesting and a powerful fact of our lives, but it's also a piece of information that needs to be factored into this business level of thinking that we're going to talk about. Any other people? Yeah.
You said our customer base is shrinking because they're also aging as we are. And then these students who graduate are not able to they could also be potential customers. So with all this shrinkage, the will have to stay the size that it is.
The size of employees? No.
Do we need that?
Oh. What's your name? Does everybody hear Simone?
No.
Can you say it again so people can hear you? Philippa, did you get this? Because I don't want you to miss
got
this. Simone, would you say that louder?
Where our customer base is shrinking, and also these students graduating who are possibly not able to read and write, they could also be potential customers. Does digital have to stay the size that it is as far as headcount if we're not going to be able to sell the products?
Think about what she said, because there are a bunch of assumptions in there. Our present, that's right,
Customers, so,
Okay.
yeah, I would have been.
Okay, there are a couple of assumptions.
Elsewhere.
All right, let me play out 5 or 6 of the assumptions. She had 5 or 6 assumptions in there that you have to catch. Okay, which is, are we only going to be selling in the future to the kinds of people we've been selling to in the past who are disappearing off the face of the earth? Literally. Number 1. Number 2, does digital know how to sell to any other kind of person than the kinds of people we've been selling to for the past 30 years? Would we know how to sell to anybody in other parts of the world, right? In countries and cultures who have never seen computers, is digital learning about how to do that? Number 3, who has seen a model, an alternative scenario for how digital will operate as a workforce of 100,000 people in the year 2000? I have not. Right? In other words, I don't know who's doing the thinking about whether or not digital has to grow from 100,000 people in 1986 to 150,000 in 1990. Who is doing the thinking that says, wait a minute, it doesn't have to keep going this way. What if it kind of levels out? Or, here's heresy for you, what if it comes back down so that by 1999, we have the same 100,000 level of employees that we had in 1986. Who's doing that kind of alternative thinking of how work might be organized, what the work might look like, and what the company might look like? I need to meet people like that. That's a crucial piece of research that this company needs to have available to it. Otherwise, you understand what happens in the absence of that research, we keep on with this sort of mentality. Okay? So that's the third assumption that was embedded in that. The fourth one is one that says, wait a minute, if these kids aren't doing so well, then we're not going to be able to hire them, and they're not going to be productive parts of our workforce. Well, that we can't sell to them, right? They won't know how to use the equipment. And then you have to say, well, wait a minute, what are we doing to ensure that those kids who are now getting a terribly inadequate education will, in fact, know how to use whatever it is digital has to offer? Right? Am I covering your question?
programs.
Well, co-op programs isn't going to cut it. You can't get enough co-ops fast enough to address what she's saying. Simona's saying there's a population of potential users out there, right, who, if left to their own devices, are not ever going to be able to use the kinds of sophisticated technology that this company sells. And so we're creating a customer base of haves and have-nots. Right? It's clear that's what's happening in society, is that places that utilize computers to a large degree, which is true of schools too, by the way, communities which happen to have high tax bases and have a lot of computers per student in them, turn out students who are much more familiar with computers than a lot of schools which are have-nots and don't have many computers per student. That is, in fact, our future customer base. Are we permitting, as a company, a population of people to grow up in this country or any other country who don't know how to use a computer? Think about that as a central business issue. Maybe that's bad business.
Wasn't there another question too? Weren't you asking also what we're doing to capture the global markets to replace the markets we're losing?
Yeah. Okay. And that brings me to this. This is a map of what's called human suffering. Human suffering in the world. All the countries in the world are ranked according to how much the populations are suffering. And it's color-coded. Okay, here's the way this works. These are the names of all the countries in the world. These are 12 characteristics like infant mortality, starvation, illiteracy, things like that, and how much of that there is in each country. On the basis of that, each one is given a score, and they're weighted according to the scores. And on the basis of that, this chart is drawn, which is color-coded according to the most misery to the least misery of countries in the world. And then that color is projected onto the world map here. See that? 3 guesses as to where digital does all its business. What color? All of its business. Right? You notice that remember those countries I told you about, the OECD countries, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development? Right? Those are the countries in the world in which digital does business. Forget about the Soviet Union, because for various legal reasons we're not allowed to. Okay? But the Soviet Union is up there too. So scratch out the Soviet Union, which is a very large piece of green here. And you have even less green. Right? Now, my concern here, and I mean, obviously some people to help think this through, is it seems to me as I think about the evolution of societies, that societies have to reach a certain stage of economic development before they can use information technology. Before it makes any sense to introduce computers. You know, in other words, at a certain level of activity, there's nothing computers can do to change what you're doing or help you much. Maybe you don't need them. Well, that is to say, if you're a dirt farmer, if you're a subsistence farmer, if you're a peasant, if you're a campesino anywhere in the world, you may not need a laptop. Now, I don't mean that disparagingly. It's just I don't know what good it's going to do you in how many more eggs you get out of your 6 chickens. But most of the people in the world live off the land. Okay. So maybe it's only at some level of economic development being organized in a particular way that computers become a useful addition to the enterprise. Maybe at the level of what's called agribusiness, in which you're managing 40,000 acres and you're trying to figure out how much drip irrigation you should put into the various pieces of acreage at what time of the year. And maybe then computers start to become a useful tool. You follow my logic? All right, so it's very clear to me, for example, that the people in the countries that are colored red on this map are not in the market for computers today. That is to say, they're trying to stay alive. Okay? These are the countries from the worst in the world, which is Mozambique, Angola, Afghanistan, Chad, Mali, Ghana, Somalia, Niger, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, Zaire, Benin, Mali. Okay? Those countries are in pretty dire shape. They've got other things on their minds, or they might say they've got more important things to think about than the refresh rate and the response time on their screen. Okay. Now, I say that a little facetiously because there are some government, usually government banks and government agencies in some countries which use computers to do their accounting, but not much in those countries in red. The countries in orange are not much better off. And so it seems to me sort of logical, if you take this kind of progression, to say that next after the countries in green are the countries in yellow, which will most be in a position to utilize some of information technology. Then the question becomes, I think, Simone, how much thinking are people in digital giving to adapting the technology that we sell for use in those countries? How much attention are we giving there? It turns out not much, because our sales goals are to identify the next billion-dollar market. Right? So we tend to think in these rather large returns, in terms of large returns. And so the way it's been put to me is where, we're 9.3 billion last year. Where is the next easiest 9 billion? Well, the next easiest 9 billion is either in green or yellow. All right, $6.95 at your local store. This does not require a $200,000 market research effort. All right, I picked this up for $6, and I can tell people which countries we need to operate in, right? And for what reason. So there's a piece of Simone's comment which I think needs to be thought about, which is, wait a minute, Macintosh is coming out with a laptop, Apple is coming out with a laptop Macintosh. And you might say, if you think about some of the things we've been talking about today, the digital has some gaps in its product line. We don't have a portable. We don't have a laptop, for that matter. We don't have a PC, right? But we don't have a laptop. So we're out of that market. Well, what does that mean? It means we're out of that market of 23 million people that Sharp thinks is the fastest growing market in the country. All right, what other markets are we out of? Well, we're out of any sort of any country that's not a more developed country. We don't work a lot in less developed countries. Well, why don't we? Here's the kicker. Here's what I'm a little concerned about. In fact, I know of a situation in Rome in which a potential customer in Rome came to the digital sales office in Rome and said, I want to buy a fax. Digital did not go to them, they came to us. Sales district manager said, wonderful, that's what we sell. We sell faxes, and we'll sell you a fax. What's your address? And he says, no, I don't want to take delivery in Rome. I want to take delivery in the Sudan. The district sales manager in Rome for digital said, then I can't sell you the fax. I can only sell you if you're going to take delivery in Rome. Right? This went on for longer than I am telling it, and the upshot was that the agency went to another company and bought a computer. Now, please understand that I believe this will be the rule rather than the exception in all future sales of digital equipment. That is to say, if from now on digital sells a fax to a customer in California, I bet the chances are greater than 50-50 that they don't want to take delivery in California. They want to take delivery in Burma, because of its Bechtel, or any of the large companies, or Schlumberger, that we sell to. those companies don't operate out of this domestic office that contacted us. They operate anywhere in the world. Right? Is digital organized right now internally in terms of its infrastructure, its order processing, its field service logistics, et cetera, to operate on that global playing field? Just wanted to shake your head. No. Bilingual, trilingual. It seems to me one of the key personnel programs that we need to institute is to encourage people to learn another language. So your career development, folks, your career future is not in English, solely in English.
See, I don't think we have a language barrier there. I think that
Oh, that wasn't language.
working on commission,
That
we
was-
just sold that.
That wasn't language. That wasn't language. That was geographic certs and how we count certs, and they have to be in the district, and we don't.
And like an incentive to make it happen.
Okay. But again, my point is, wouldn't you get the attention of a line manager if you started whispering things in their ears which helped them understand the international implications which cross some of the organizational boundaries in digital? To the extent, I believe you would, that they would start paying attention to you and asking you, tell me more about this. That sounds like something I should know more about, I should pay attention to. You mean my people should understand other cultures? Is that what you're trying to say? So, you see, I think that's a foot in the door for somebody in personnel to be invited to the line manager table, in which you can then help, by the way, educate the line management to think human resource. You know, as you see, I think you have to find some shrewd ways of getting people's attention. That's what I call hitting them upside the head. You hit them upside the head by whispering Bombay in their ear. Meaning, if there are any programmers who don't want to do it here, that's okay. We know where there are dozens, and they work for less. And they're only one keystroke away, because business is conducted electronically. They don't have to drive to work. It's only we who think we have to drive to work. See how funny it is? We haven't sort of kept up with the remarkable revolutions of our times. And it's no wonder, because they're all only 40 years old. 40 years ago, television started, computers started, right? The UN started, the atomic bomb started. I was trying to think of all the things that started when I was doing this. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's a very interesting world we live in. We live in interesting times. I think we need as much help as we can get to get through interesting times. I think we need each other. Luckily, we're going to have each other, whether we like it or not, for a very long time, and so we better learn to get good at working together.